Hello and welcome to Business Talk, brought to you by the Sharonville Chamber of Commerce. I'm Brent Scarce with Emory Federal Credit Union. I'm your host. Today here in studio we have Carl Ulrich with Sibley, Shillitoe & Dyer and Pandy Pridemore from The Human Resource USA, here to talk about the interview. When we're interviewing a new employee, what should we be asking? What are we allowed to ask? Carl, Pandy?
Well, it's a big question. So I think the first question you ask yourself when the interviewing process is, what's the goal? What are we doing it for? What are we trying to find out? What are we using the interview process to do? And it seems to me when you interview a potential hire, one of the things you're really trying to find out is, are they articulate? Can they speak in complete sentences? Do they know their stuff? Are they presentable? Do they present themselves professionally? Do they make a good fit culturally to the firm? There are a lot of things that you can only determine, I think, when you have somebody in a room together having a conversation. You can learn a lot from a resume, you can learn a lot from social media posts, you can learn a lot from other sources as well. But I think that interview is really important to understand the person and how they interact in a group setting. And so that is, I think, one of the first questions you need to be thinking about when you set up an interview.
Now, Pandy, am I allowed to have things like printouts of their social media sitting on the desk and, ask them about it when I'm interviewing a prospective employee?
It just amazes me how many people don't research the candidate and don't know very much about the individual before having them come in for the on-site one-on-one.
I mean, I think it's pretty common these days, social media sites like LinkedIn. A lot of times people will go there to kind of look at their professional background and, and maybe if they volunteer at different, organizations and that sort of thing.
But now that you've brought that up, let's hit the most crucial part of that part of the process, in that you can't always believe everything that you see on there.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many individuals misrepresent themselves, give themselves titles that are not reflective of what they truly.
I was vice president of. Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
And the other major catch with that is on LinkedIn, you can get referrals and references from individuals, testimonials from other people. And oh my goodness, it's hysterical that past employees who had no working relationship with this individual are giving these glowing reviews. And I'm thinking, where in the world did this person get this information? And it's all made up.
Wow.
It's completely made up. So you cannot believe everything you read or see on that. Start, see what you can come up with, but then make a part of the process in the interview, validating all of that. What you read is, did it really happen?
Now, can you decide, Carl, to perhaps not hire somebody or offer them a position if what you see on their social media turns you off?
Well, absolutely. I mean, again, it depends a little bit on what it is you're seeing and what information you're relying on.
The party
Right.
pose on the
Right.
on the table.
I mean, I like the idea of using social media as as an add-on to the interview process, because I think in the interview process people tend to be more guarded. They're rehearsed. They're ready for answers. They're ready to give answers, and so it's not as not always as good an indicator of how somebody presents themselves. But social media, in addition to that, gives you the opportunity to see what they look like, how they present themselves in unguarded moments, how they present themselves when they don't think anybody really cares all that much about what they read and see. And it's surprising to me that oftentimes there's a real disconnect between the person's social media presence on the one hand and the way they're trying to project themselves in an interview.
Right.
And if there is that disconnect, if there is a disagreement between the social media profile on the one hand and the way they're presenting themselves in an official interview face to face, that's a warning sign.
Yeah.
And so I think you can use it in that sense too.
So if they say they get along well, that they're really good at collaborating with others, and then you look at their social media and they're constantly arguing with people on Facebook and calling them out and calling them names and and picking fights and that sort of thing. I mean that you could see that maybe being something different than maybe what they're
Well,
trying
it's
to tell
also
you.
not something that you want in the workplace,
Right.
especially if it's politically driven,
Argumentative, yeah.
if it's very passionate on a particular topic. But I'm going to disagree with you here on a point. I do want there to be a different individual coming in on the on-site interview, and I also try to pre-warn my clients to be careful. Just because she's wearing purple hair in this particular picture, or that she's got short shorts, or he looks like he's doing something that you wouldn't do, doesn't mean that the individual doesn't have the skill sets and the competencies that you're looking for. And we have to be able to accept individuals different than ourselves, and we shouldn't be so judgmental. I mean, we have to be really careful about how we view and judge what we see on social media. You have to understand what's important. Cultural fits are very, very important.
Yeah, that was
I
going to be
get
my next question is, if I happen to work in an environment where most of the folks that work, in the office with me are of a particular, viewpoint on politics or something like that, can you hire to say, we really only want, because I heard a story that somebody said, hey, if you voted for this person, for president, we don't want you working here. Is that something you can do?
Well, it's not illegal. I guess the question is, would you really want to do that, and why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
It seems to me that the real touchstone for hiring, and whether you're interviewing somebody face to face using social media or both, the real question is, can this person do the job? Are they
Yeah.
going to be
Right.
are they going to be suited for the position? Are they going to be, in Pandy's words, a good culture fit? Those are critical questions, and I think I suppose there might be situations where political viewpoints do matter. I mean, if I'm hiring somebody in the White House, I probably, want to have somebody
Right.
with a political affiliation like my own.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if I'm hiring somebody in my office, and I'm representing, as an attorney, I represent lots of different clients
Right.
with lots of different viewpoints. It's helpful for me to have a diverse workforce,
Yeah.
people who represent all those viewpoints in the office, and so that's, I think, useful. So again, I think you really do have to define, you do have to establish the criteria, figure out what it is you really need in that position, and what is essential, what is really, what are critical skills, critical attributes for that particular position, and then, design your interview, design your process, design your hiring system around that.
I think that's the strongest fundamental part of this this talk today, is if our viewers take that and start with that, understanding it is a process. And then to expound on what Carl just said, choose the individuals that are most pertinent and relevant to do the interviewing. It amazes me how many times my clients will bring people in and they'll have panel interviews of 4 or 5 people on this candidate, and they're doing all the talking. The candidate's not doing anything but listening, and there's no interaction, and half the people on the panel have no reason to be in that interview. So I think once they just establish the competencies and skill sets needed to meet the needs of the business, and you bring in the candidates that you believe have those skill sets, then stay focused on that kind of a conversation. And if you've got a direct supervisor coming in, have him talk about the day-to-day, have his supervisor determine what the expectations are and convey those, and have a give and take type conversation. The candidate, and I tell candidates all this all the time when they come in, you're interviewing the employer as much as
Yeah.
the employer is interviewing you.
Yeah.
Yep.
We should be,
So
yeah.
do a give and take, and as an employer, please do skip the sales pitch. Get down to the nitty gritty and make sure that your decision to accept or pass on this candidate is well founded.
Right.
I think
What-
that's a really good point, Pandy. I would add that I think when I do interviews of potential hires, one of the most important aspects of that interview process is the questions I get back from the applicant, and whether or not, I may ask them a lot of questions and their responses are important, but almost more important to me is what they ask me. Have they thought about the position? Have they thought about what they want to do and whether they fit well, and can they articulate those questions well? Are they relevant? Are they material type questions, or are they just fillers? And that tells me that they're thinking. It tells me that they're prepared, and that they're interested. If I go through an interviewing process and I don't have the applicant asking me anything at all, I'm probably going to write them off. I'm probably not going to hire that person.
Just not having a natural curiosity about the position is kind of a,
Well, unprepared.
It's
and uninterested.
engagement.
yeah.
It's engagement. I heard a survey the other day on the radio that said that candidates who come in and are all smiles and happy are taken less seriously than the individuals who come in and are very serious about asking the questions and engaging and wanting to know, is this going to be, do I really want to work here?
Right.
And
You're going to spend 8 to 10 hours a day here probably. I mean,
Right.
Is it
Well,
an
we
environment
hope.
that you want?
You have
Yeah.
to have a conversation with somebody at some point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like to hear companies that have their interviewing team coach or prompted ahead of time. The last thing you want to do is have a candidate come into an interview with this person and they're calling the position a bookkeeper. They go over to this person and they're calling it a controller position, and you go over to this person and they're saying, okay, we'd like to offer you the director of
Yeah.
accounting position.
Yeah.
The candidate does not understand what you guys are
Yeah.
doing. Obviously, you don't know what you're doing. And so you got to make sure your entire team's on the same page.
Yeah.
The position's going to report to this person. This is where they're going to work. These are the expectations. You talk about this. You talk about this. I'll talk about that. And here's another thing. Let's talk about the growing movement now that a number of states have adopted, where you aren't even to speak about compensation. There's a movement now where compensation's not that important. We don't want to know what you're currently making
Oh,
because
is it asking the
for equality.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so let's not
So
talk
what do you
about
make now? You know?
exactly. That's
Yeah.
going to be eliminated. Well, a number of states have already eliminated it. Ohio obviously hasn't yet, but Kentucky hasn't. But because of equality, if the company has decided they want this position, then establish that pay range now. Know what it's worth to you and where your return of investment is going to be in paying that individual, and then stay focused on that. Is this person seem to be fit within that? I've got a great question to that, and I coach my clients. If you want to make sure again that we're talking apples to apples, we're not talking about a $50,000 position and we got $200,000 people looking at it. Ask the question if you need. What if an offer was extended today? What offer would you refuse?
Okay.
It makes them think.
Yeah.
And the ones that are very serious, who are at the top of the ranks, at the top of the ladder, they're going to stop and they're going to say, well, I was making 130.
Yeah. So I certainly don't want to make less than that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They volunteered. We didn't ask. They volunteered. And then we can honestly say, well, okay, we obviously aren't in the same ballpark.
Right.
And it stops the interviewing process quickly.
Yeah.
Instead of falling in love with this candidate and getting all excited about making the offer, and then all of a sudden we got this $80,000 gap.
Yeah. They
That's
can't afford
not
them,
going to
basically.
work.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the tricks coming up.
Let's talk about some of the questions that we are allowed to ask and some that we're not allowed to ask. So, some of the hot ones that you tend to hear that, are no-nos, like, what do you plan to have kids? Things of that nature. What do you do outside of work? What kind of lifestyle do you have?
Well,
these
that's not necessarily a bad question.
Okay.
What do you do for fun?
Okay.
Getting to know a little bit about the person. I don't think that's necessarily off limits. But there's certain topics I think you want to avoid. So we hear about Title VII, for example, federal and state laws, anti-discrimination laws, and those are based upon. You can't discriminate on the basis of age, of sex, of religion, of race, that kind of thing. And so, if you're interviewing somebody, you probably want to avoid disability is another one where I think a lot of interviewing employers get into trouble. Have you ever had a workers' compensation claim? Can't say that. That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, among other things. And so you have to avoid questions that sort of get to. You want to avoid age-related questions. You have to avoid questions that sort of display a bias in favor of someone, for example, who is career-oriented as opposed to family-oriented. If a woman wants to have kids in a few years, that's her right. That's something that probably shouldn't be asked as part of the interviewing process. So questions geared around that, religious practices, those kinds of things, are pretty much off limits. Age-related questions. I had a case a couple years ago where a executive went out and did a couple day-long interview, and a major position for a major corporation out of state, and they spent several days there, and came back after the interview, felt really good about it. Then took a couple days before they got an email back from the Vice President of Human Resources, and in the email, the Vice President of Human Resources said, "Well, we thought you were a great candidate, that you were very qualified, one of the best qualified candidates for the position, but we decided to go with someone younger for the position." Now, I mean, that's a terrible red flag. Obviously, it's an age-related bias. That's essentially admitting that you discriminated against the individual on the basis of age, and you also admitted in the same email that the person was highly qualified for the position. So it doesn't take a genius to it doesn't take a genius to figure out that that's probably the thing you shouldn't want to do. So in most cases, you want to avoid any questions relating to those kinds of protected classification, protected status. I think good questions are questions designed to get the interviewees to talk. To Pandy's point, I think you want to hear from them. You want to hear their comments. You want to hear their ideas, their goals, their objectives. And I once got a question when I interviewed for a job a couple years ago. It was I thought a great question, and I use it from time to time. The question was, okay, I'm going to give you a choice. Are you a hard worker, or are you really smart? And you can't be both. Tell me which one it is. Now there's no right answer to that question, but it's designed to get the person to be thinking on their feet, and to some extent displays either a level of confidence or depending on how they respond to that. I got that question, and I ask it from time to time, and again, I'm not as much interested in the substance of the response, but I'm interested in how they deal with that, how they react when confronted with a question that doesn't have an obvious answer to it. To me, that's very telling, and those kinds of things are very useful. I think getting the interviewee into a conversation that they are an equal participant in is really important.
Now, Pandy, are you more of a fan of how many interviews should we have with a person? I mean, should you go through like a 3-interview process, or should we do like a group interview first that kind of gives an overview first, and then you do the one-on-ones, and then what do you think the best practice is?
There is no best practice, because if you've got the small company where the owner is primarily the only management member, one's going to be enough. I mean, he's obviously trying to build his company, and he's the only one who truly understands. But then you've got the quick draw artists, my cowboys, who are so entrepreneurial that they're hiring the waitress at Frisch's and making her the marketing person, and you've got them making very quick decisions for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the organization. I think it depends on the capacity of the position. I mean, if you're hiring a CFO, then you obviously need to put a little bit more thought into it and get more people involved. But let's kind of go back to something that you said, because I really think at this point we need to talk about some best practices that kind of bring all this together. If it doesn't matter who you're interviewing or how many interviews you have, please make sure that everyone is trained. Make sure that VP knows what he's allowed to say and what he's not supposed to be saying.
We're really looking for someone younger. That's really something not to say.
And we think you're really qualified, but
you're really qualified, but you're not pretty enough. You're not young enough.
Right.
I mean, things like that.
We don't make this stuff up. I mean, this is happening every day. And just because you own the company doesn't mean that you have all the answers and that you've been trained properly. So make sure that everybody's trained. This is not hard. It's really, really not hard. Another major mistake I find all the time is that people who are involved in the interviewing process are writing all over the resumes. They're making notes. And one of my clients, bless their hearts, new supervisors, all just so enthusiastic, so excited, but they're taking those notes then, the resumes and all their notes, and downloading them into their applicant tracking system so that everybody can see them. And so, well, guess who else can see them? When a subpoena comes for a discrimination case,
well, especially
and they
if you're writing inappropriate thoughts or questions.
He was the old guy. He was the old guy that came in the green shirt.
Yeah.
Or she was the heavier woman with the curly hair. Or she meant, here's a good one. He mentioned that he has a child and she has medical conditions. Just had that one. Just had that one the other day. It was like, oh, okay, so are we hiring this guy or not? And if not, because again, did we discriminate him against?
Right.
So
So you can't,
Don't write.
You can't ask questions about the health of your family,
Right,
or whether
right.
you're married or not, or whether you plan to have kids. Those are no-nos, right?
Those are
it has
no-nos.
nothing to do with the competencies and skill sets needed for the position. And to, again, what Carl said, know what you're going in for. Get your process in place and know exactly what the needs of the business are and stay focused on that. There is no ideal
Right.
candidate and there is no ideal employee. So
It's a great religion case a couple years ago where the hiring committee for a university was hiring somebody for a science position, a scientific researcher, and they found somebody who had great credentials. And one of the interviewees, one of the hiring committee members, decided to do a Google search and search out on the internet for this person just to see what they'd done, and they found a religious blog that this person had set up. And we went through there and realized that the religion blog shared a number of very religious-oriented posts, and in other words, the potential hire had a very strong religious belief, and it was displayed in this post and in this blog that he established. And so, ultimately, the person downloaded the information, printed it out apparently, and put it in the file. The hiring committee decided that this was one of maybe 3 or 4 remaining applicants, I guess, and didn't get the job. They hired somebody else. The hiring committee decided, for other reasons, that was their position, that the other person that they actually hired was more qualified. But the individual whose blog it was realized that he hadn't been hired and found out somehow that the religious information made it into the hiring file. And of course, now the question is of perception. Was it the religion that influenced the decision not to hire, or was it something else? And so there was that dispute. And ultimately, the case resolved itself in settlement for a sizable 6-figure settlement. But the lesson of that is, I think Patty made a couple really good points, and I think this illustrates. You do have to have a process that's disciplined. You have to have people who are trained. And you have to have people who are trained who don't go off the reservation, who don't do their own thing, who don't decide to, they have to know what is and isn't appropriate. And if for some reason they do, put this bad stuff in the soup, as it were, it can be costly, and it can be a very expensive mistake. So training is critical, and discipline in the hiring process is critical, including in the interview process.
Any other last thoughts, best practices that we want to talk about?
yeah, I got a couple
Yeah.
more. Keep going.
Well, I was going to say, I want to again come back to the point of conversation. I do think when we interview, we are fundamentally gauging a person's ability to converse. That's one very threshold issue that we're trying to assess. And I'm less concerned about physical appearance for the most part. I mean, if I'm hiring somebody for a law office, I want them to present themselves in a professional demeanor. I want them to be reasonable in their appearance. But to Patty's point, I think there are certain things that we have to understand that there are different sensitivities, and in some cases those are based on religious beliefs. You have to be prepared for that, and you have to look past them. And I think in some cases looking for those differences is a strength, not a weakness.
So if you have someone come in and their appearance is as with a lot of perhaps body art and piercings and things of that nature, can you get in trouble for saying, hey, that wouldn't be appropriate in our environment?
I think it goes back to what
Because
position
that's
are you hiring
very popular
I was gonna
these
say.
for?
days.
I'm hiring in my law office. I hire somebody who's a runner, a court runner, or an office staff person. To me, body art, no problem. Now, business law firm, that's probably not the kind of person I want to put in front of a business client as an attorney. Maybe not. Maybe not. Depends. Depends on the circumstances. But there are different requirements for different positions. As long as they're bona fide requirements, as long as they're based upon the needs of the business and the needs of that particular position, I think they're fair game to exclude people on that basis.
So maybe the job description would have that listed, there as far as, because if you're hiring someone to be a dock worker, or they're going to be working behind the scenes
Sure.
and really not very visible, to the client, obviously those things, they're not important at all, really.
Right.
I mean, if they can do the job, if it's a physical position or something like that, that's what you're looking for. Are you able to lift above, are you allowed to ask?
Essential work functions.
Yeah, yeah.
Essential
Are you
work
able to lift
functions.
things above your head, and this sort of thing?
It's knowing your audience, right?
Yeah, right.
Knowing your environment and the job requirements.
Yeah. Let's also talk about, let's stay away from collecting too much information at the beginning of the interview. Don't ask for the employment eligibility documents, not until the offer's been extended. Don't do a background check unless you're intending to move forward, unless it's a Department of Transportation where we have to actually verify the CDL. We have to, do a little bit more there. But be very, very careful that you're using updated documents for that kind of stuff. Don't watch those notes, shred notes, please.
Don't include them in the file, right?
And nobody should be talking about compensation unless it's the actual hiring authority.
Okay. Carl, Pandy, this is great information. I mean, hopefully, we could probably talk about this for probably an hour or two with all the different things that you guys have seen over the years. So hopefully our viewers will watch this and take heed to what we were talking about and what you can and can't do and what you should be looking out for in interviewing someone. Our guests have been Carl Ulrich with Sibley, Shillitoe & Dyer, and Pandy Pridemore from The Human Resource USA. You've been watching Business Talk. I'm Britt Scarce. Until next time, we'll see you right here.